I met my wife 18 years ago, right after college. We were living in the same apartment building, and she was a few doors down from me. I would see her from time to time in the elevator or while we were doing laundry at the same time in the basement. I always thought that she was cute, but I was a little nervous, and it took me a while to work up the courage to talk to her. She agreed to go out to dinner with me, and we have been together ever since. It didn't take long for me to realize that she was the one for me. I was ready to settle down almost as soon as I met her. After 2 years, we moved out of the apartment into a lovely home in the suburbs and got married. Not long after, we had our first child and our life truly began. The first few years that we were together, we were both working to keep the roof over our heads. I knew that wasn't ideal for us because she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. Unfortunately, at the time my job was pretty menial and I wasn't making enough money to support all of us. After a few years, I got a pretty nice promotion, and with that came the ability to take care of my family alone. My wife quit her job, and we had never been happier. She was a fantastic mother and a great wife. I came home every day to a delicious dinner and clean, happy children. It was pretty much everything I could have wanted in my life. A few years ago, my wife's mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. At first, we would go visit her in her home and make sure she was okay. There was a home health aide who would go visit her a couple of times a week as well. Her condition progressed, and it was the right decision to move my mother-in-law into our home. My wife was home all day so she could make sure she was being taken care of properly. With her health insurance, she would have an aide coming as well. It was very exhausting for my wife after my mother-in-law moved in. Thankfully, we had a wonderful home health aide who would come and help her so she could take some time away. The first one we had was a young woman who was fresh out of school. After a while, it almost felt like she was a part of the family. We loved her, and she really seemed to care about my mother-in-law. Unfortunately, she ended up moving away when she got a better job offer a couple of hours away from us. The insurance agency sent over a new aide, and I wasn't particularly happy with the choice, if I'm being honest. It was a young man who was working his way through physical therapy school. He was in his early 20s and in very good shape. On top of that, every time I would see him interacting with my wife, I would see her blushing and giggling like a schoolgirl. He was very friendly, borderline flirty at times. I had been with my wife for about 17 years at the time, so the thought of her cheating on me was non-existent. I figured my wife was just flattered by his demeanor. I was sure it was at the very least a confidence boost that the young man would be flirting with her. My wife looked very good. Yes, she had gained about 20 kilograms over the years that I've known her, but she gave birth to 2 children and had also aged over the time. She was still beautiful. The home health aide schedule had him coming over to our house twice a week. He usually stopped by around 11 or 12, early enough in the day that I rarely ever crossed paths with him. I saw him from time to time when I was working from home or stopping by for my lunch break. He had a lot of time at my house alone with my wife. I didn't really notice anything was off until I caught my wife in the act. In hindsight, there were a few signs here and there that maybe I should have caught on to. But I really never thought that my wife would cheat on me, so I was oblivious. I guess one of the big things that I recognize now is how my wife would occasionally ask me if I was coming home for lunch or not. Prior to that, I would sort of decide on a whim whether or not I wanted to go home or eat at my work cafeteria. If I went home, I just made a sandwich and relaxed in the dining room during the break. She would never ask me if I was coming home before. I would walk in the door and she would just be surprised to see me. Looking back, she would ask me very frequently on days that the health aide was coming over. Another thing is that she would be a little more particular about her makeup and what she was wearing on the days that he came over. Now, at the time I did notice that. I just thought it was funny. Again, I never thought that she would cheat on me, so I thought it was just her trying to look nice, so the cute young college student in our house would flirt with her. I didn't think there was anything wrong with a little harmless flirting. I see now I was wrong to think that. The aide was there to care for her sick mother. Carrying on an affair didn't seem like it would be a priority. Anyway, I found out about what was happening between them one afternoon when I decided to come home for lunch. It had been a very stressful day at work, and I had a bit of a headache, so I wanted to close my eyes for a little while and alleviate that before the rest of the day. I drove home around noon, and I saw that the health aid's car was in the parking lot. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I figured I would pop in and say hi to him, then go to my room. I walked in my front door, and I saw my mother-in-law sitting in the living room watching a soap opera. The health aide was nowhere in sight. I asked her where everyone was, and she said that my wife was having a conversation with the aide in the dining room. Right away, my mind went into disaster mode. I still didn't assume there was anything sexual happening there. I thought that if they were having a private conversation, it was an update about my mother-in-law's health. I walked over to our dining room right away to see what was going on. If there was something serious, I wanted to know. When I opened the door, I found my wife performing oral on the health aide. I was in complete shock. I just stared at them for a minute before anybody said anything. They didn't even notice me right away either. The health aide's eyes were closed, and when he opened them after a moment and saw me, he pushed my wife away. She quickly stood up and tried to explain what was happening, but I just walked away from her and to my office. As I was leaving, I heard the health aide practically begging me not to tell anybody about what happened. My wife followed me into my office and began profusely apologizing for what happened. She told me that it had just come over them, and it just happened. She says she was sorry and that it would never happen again, and she begged me to forgive her. And I asked her if it was the first time that it happened. She told me no, and I could tell right away that it was a lie. She couldn't meet my eyes when she said it, and that was her biggest tell. I just shook my head, and she realized she was caught, and she confessed the truth. A few weeks after he started working there, they were alone in the living room after my mother-in-law had fallen asleep, and it just happened. Neither of them had premeditated it in any way. They were attracted to each other, and they acted on impulse. Afterwards, they'd both agreed that they would never mention what happened to anyone because she didn't want to lose me, and he didn't want to lose his job. They planned on pretending like it never happened, but the next time he was there, they realized that they couldn't. They slept with each other again, and they agreed that if it happened in the future, they just wouldn't say anything. It only ever happened in my house when he was supposed to be there taking care of my mother-in-law. They never messaged about it, they never spoke outside of his visits, and they never put any label on what was happening between them. It was just sex. My wife tried to rationalize it as her having needs that were getting fulfilled by him, but that was obviously bullshit because I was supposed to be the one doing that. If there was something she was unhappy with, she should have come to me. I told her that I needed time to think about everything, and I packed a suitcase and left. I checked into a hotel room, and I spent the weekend contemplating what I wanted to do. I had been with my wife for 18 years at that point, and I didn't know if it was even worth it to divorce. We had children together. What would divorce do to them? In the end, I didn't think that I could ever look at her the same way again. I ran through all the scenarios in my head, and divorce was the only option for me. I did some research on divorce attorneys, and I found a really good one in my area that I set up an appointment with for the following week. I just couldn't stop thinking about how he begged me not to tell anyone about what he was doing. I wasn't just going to let that guy sleep with my wife and get away with it scotch-free. I ended up calling the agency that he worked for and telling them everything. From the way it seemed, he was very much on the clock while he was with my wife. Generally speaking, hooking up with a client on company time is a no-no. As for my wife, divorcing her was going to be punishment enough. It would force her to have to get a job to support herself and her mother. We didn't fully own our home, so if she kept it in the divorce, there was no way she could afford the mortgage payments on her own. She'd have to move, and with the amount of financial stress she would have after all of it, I figured I would be a shoo-in for custody of the kids. Her entire life was going to be upended and ruined because she couldn't control her impulses around one person. She betrayed her marriage to somebody who loved her unconditionally and supported her. That would all just be the consequences of her own actions. We are now divorced, and she is living in a one-bedroom apartment with her mother. She comes and visits with our kids every weekend. She has a job as a receptionist at a towing company now. Everything she went to school for turned out to be pretty useless for her because she'd been out of the job force for so long. I'm happy alone now. It's taken some time for me to adjust to being single again, but I'd rather be single than with a cheater. I gave 18 years of my life to her, and I honestly don't know if I will be ready to put myself back out there anytime soon. OP, with everything that your wife had going on, I can't even help but wonder how she found the time to have an affair. Maybe it was a way for her to relieve some of the stress she was feeling, but that's not an excuse. If there was something going on with the two of you, she should have gone to you about it. There should have never been an excuse for her to end up with the health aide. You did the right thing by calling the agency where the aide was working. He shouldn't have been irresponsible like that on the job. He was sleeping with a married woman instead of taking care of his clients, and that can be dangerous. He definitely should not be going into the medical field. Now for our next story. My 37 male fiancé, 28 female, and I used to work in the same firm when we met. I'm a little bit older than she is, so I had already established myself in the office when she was a new hire. We connected right away, and it didn't take long for us to start dating. Because my office has a strict no-dating policy, we kept our relationship a secret until she was able to find another job somewhere else. We both saw a lot of potential in our relationship, so it was her choice to leave the firm to work somewhere else. Our relationship was great for the first couple of years. We were happy together, and both of us would talk about the grand plans we had for our future. She moved into my house, and shortly after I proposed. We put our plans for the wedding on the back burner because we were both so focused on our careers. Neither of us was super invested in having a huge wedding anyway. I've been married before in the past. My ex-wife was my first love, and things didn't end well with us. So taking the step to propose to my fiancé was a big deal for me. She and I had talked about marriage for a good majority of our relationship, and she assured me that she valued it and took it seriously. That was important to me, otherwise I wouldn't have proposed. She was new at the firm she was practicing law at, and the partners who worked above her took advantage of her eagerness to get ahead. They always had her stay late to cover a lot of the grunt work that the more experienced lawyers in the firm didn't want to do. I knew that my fiancé was brilliant, so it upset me. However, she knew that it was something she was going to have to get past when she was hired there, so she took it on the chin and worked through it. After about a year of working at the firm, she got a promotion, and all of that stopped. She was being treated with the utmost respect, and she was bringing a lot of loyal clientele to the firm. The partners there realized that they were lucky to have her. So when she started staying extra late at the office, using the excuse of having an excess of papers to file or other small menial tasks, I started getting a little suspicious. Up until that point, she hadn't done anything to make me question our relationship. Because of what happened with my ex-wife, I was a little on edge with my fiancé. I had some trust issues that I needed to work through. A couple of times a week, she would stay later at the office to do work that an assistant or an intern should have been doing. One night I asked her about it, and she got somewhat confrontational with me in response. She didn't think I had the right to question what she was doing at her job. We got into a bit of an argument over it because she was framing it as me being possessive of her time, or controlling when that wasn't the case. I'll admit, I might have been in the wrong for questioning her for it to begin with, but she wasn't very understanding of where I was coming from. In the end, she was cheating on me when she was staying late at the office. She was just trying to deflect some of the guilt onto me by making me the bad guy. Anyway, we got over the fight and things went back to normal for a couple of weeks. We talked through it, and I explained the things that I went through with my ex-wife, and she told me that she would try and make me feel a little more comfortable. She had her assistant pick up some of the slack at the office, and she didn't have to stay late for a couple of weeks. Our offices were on the same block, not even a 2-minute walk away from each other. We would often get together and have lunch at a cafe near us. One morning, she was complaining to me about how she wasn't going to be able to make lunch because she was going to be working through it to attend a Zoom meeting with some overseas clients. I felt bad for her, so I thought it would be a nice gesture to grab her something quick to eat and run it over to her while I was on my lunch break. I got there and a receptionist told me that she went out to lunch. It was weird, but I tried not to let my mind get carried away because it was entirely possible that a meeting was canceled or she was just grabbing a bagel from a street vendor. I left the office, and later that night, when we were both home, I mentioned how I stopped by to bring her food and she wasn't there. She confirmed what I initially thought and told me that she just needed a coffee break and went to a cafe down the street. Over the next few weeks, I noticed that she was on her phone a lot more while we were together. She was constantly messaging someone, and she was very protective of it in front of me. She would be sure to tilt the phone away from me when she opened a message or took a call. A lot of red flags were raised for me again when she started acting like that. I was afraid that if I mentioned anything about it, I was going to push her away from me, and I didn't want that. I thought that she was somebody that I could see myself with, and I wanted to trust her. She called me one evening about an hour before she was supposed to leave the office and told me that one of the other lawyers at her firm had a family emergency, and they were all staying late to help them out. I asked for more details, but she was very vague about everything. I noticed that she hesitated when I asked about what lawyer had the emergency as well. My gut told me that she was lying. I told her that I was fine with her staying and just to call me when she was on her way home so I knew when to expect her. Instead of going home that night, I parked my car outside of her office building and kept my eyes on the door. Around 5 o'clock, I noticed several of her coworkers leaving the office on time. The real nail in the coffin was seeing the man she told me had a family emergency walk out of the building. It seemed like everybody but my fiancé left the building to go home. I waited for about half an hour to see if anybody else straggled out of the building, and no one did. I worked up the nerve to go inside to see what was really going on. I was terrified to find out what the truth was, but I knew that I needed to. I got out of my car and went into the building to find their offices almost completely empty. My fiancé's things were still sitting by her desk, so it confirmed to me that she was in fact there. I happened to notice that her phone was sitting on the desk. I picked it up and did a quick skim through it to see if there was any indication of what I was about to find. There was a brief conversation with a partner from her firm telling her that he needed her and told her to come up with an excuse to stay late. She responded with a thumbs up and 15 minutes later sent him an office number. I put the phone down and went right to that office. The blinds were drawn, but I could hear very obvious sex noises from the other side of the door. I almost didn't want to open it. I knew what was happening. I didn't need to see it with my own eyes. But I wanted to get that confirmation. I also want to get the proof. I pulled out my phone and I opened the door while I had my camera set to record. My fiancé and one of the partners at the firm were both on a conference table having sex. They were lying down with their feet closest to the door, so they didn't even notice me right away. I was frozen there for a moment trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I could have made a huge scene right then and there, but I decided not to. I decided that I wanted to make them both regret what they did before they had a chance to try and explain it away. I quietly closed the door and rushed out of the office to go home. I spent the majority of the night in my home office to avoid my fiancé. I knew some of the other partners and employees at my fiancé's firm, so when she was out of earshot, I reached out to them and told them what happened. People were shocked, and they were honestly disturbed that they were so brazenly having an affair in the office. One of the other lawyers at the firm told me that he would contact HR on my behalf to file a report. I sent him the evidence that I had of their affair and left it in his hands. I didn't say anything to my fiancée about her staying late at the office at all. When she noticed I seemed much calmer about it this time around, she did it again 2 nights later. She called me and told me that she would be staying late to help the same coworker who had the family emergency catch up on work. When she told me that, I reached out to her coworker who said they'd contact HR and told him that she would likely be engaging in those activities that very night. He told me he would take care of it. I parked outside of her office again that night. I noticed that a majority of the staff left the building on time, aside from my fiancé and the man she was cheating on me with. The coworker that I spoke with lingered outside with another woman for about 10 minutes before they both went back inside the building. I didn't know if they were planning on catching them in the act or what, but I imagined that they probably would. About 15 minutes later, my fiancé practically ran out of the building in visible distress. The other 3 people were not far behind her. My fiancé saw me sitting in the car across the street from her building and ran right over to it. She tried to open the door, but it was locked. I rolled down the window and I asked her what was wrong. I think she knew right away that I had some involvement in whatever just happened in the building. She told me that she had just been fired and wanted to go home to deal with it. I told her that she was no longer welcome in my home and that she would need to find a hotel room for the night. I rolled up the window before I drove off, leaving her crying on the sidewalk. The engagement was broken off. Thankfully, we had barely started planning the wedding, so there wasn't much to take care of as far as that goes. The partner that she was sleeping with ended up getting fired from the firm as well. I've had about enough I can take of being betrayed by my partners. I hate to be this way, but it's going to take a long time for me to be willing to open up with another woman. Maybe someday I'll meet someone who I can put my trust in. OP, it's always interesting to see how cheaters will try to blame their partners in some way to try and alleviate some of the guilt they feel. Whether that's accusing you of being demanding or controlling because you wanted to know where she was or getting mad about somebody looking through a cell phone, it's a scapegoat for their own misdeeds. I'm glad that they both got fired. I'm sure your fiancé will have a very difficult time in the future finding a new law firm to work at. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.